Gracious message from Dongbu English Service.
Did you know that a dense fog covering 7 city blocks to a depth of 100 feet is composed of less than 1 glass of water? That amount of 1 glass of water is divided into about 60 billion tiny droplets, and those particles settle over a city or the countryside, and they almost blot out everything from our sight. We Christians often live our lives in a dense fog. We allow a cup full of troubles and difficulties to cloud our vision and dampen the will of God for our lives. It is a maybe moment in our lives, and during this time, we experience a difficult time to decipher the will of God. What should we do then when we have a maybe moment in our lives? We will look at 1 Samuel chapter 14. And from this chapter, one man named Jonathan, son of King Saul, who took his maybe moment as an opportunity to seek the will of God and turn it to victory through his faith. Before we open to chapter 14, I want to remind you of what happened leading up to this chapter. King Saul was rebuked by the prophet Samuel as a result of offering a sacrifice, which was supposed to be done by prophet Samuel, not by King Saul. Because of Saul's foolish decisions, God prepared for the new king whose heart was after him. In this chapter 14, God foreshadows the faith of King David through the faith of Jonathan, a man of faith and courage. In the meantime, God continuously intervenes and restrains the Philistines from completely destroying Israel, and it is the background of chapter 14. As you see, chapter 14 is a very long chapter. And this morning, we will just focus on the faith of Jonathan. In this chapter, we'll find amazing elements of Jonathan's faith and how his faith led Israel to victory while his father, King Saul, was hiding from Philistines' army. It must be Jonathan's maybe moment in his life. This morning, we will examine 3 elements from Jonathan's faith, which God used to bring victory to Israel when he was in the moment of maybe. The first element we find in the faith of Jonathan in his maybe moment is that he knew whom he should trust and consult in his maybe moment. Let us go to verse 1 of chapter 14. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Notice that Jonathan did not tell his father when he decided to go to the Philistine camp. Why wouldn't he tell his father? He knew his father was at the lowest point of his faith. That's why he trusted God to lead him. In verse 6, we see how uncertain Jonathan's faith is in this moment. Verse 6, Jonathan said to the young man, his armor-bearer, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few." Pay attention to what he says. It may be that the Lord will work for us. Jonathan was not sure of his battle situation. He said, maybe the Lord will work for us. In this verse, there is no voice of God telling Jonathan to pursue the enemy. But he knew God was on his side. How? He calls the Philistines uncircumcised men. Referring to the Philistines as uncircumcised men means they had no covenant with God, and therefore they were not God's people. Jonathan had no fear because he knew Israel was the children of God. That is why he said his armor-bearer, "Perhaps the Lord will fight in our behalf." He put his confidence on God's saving power instead of his own abilities. This is the kind of attitude we Christians need to emulate whenever we face oppositions and challenges ahead. If you know you are a child of God, nothing can hinder you, nothing can put you down. You see, there are doors God opens and doors God shuts, but we must know that the shut door is not always the refusal of God, but it is a test from God. God may just want us to turn the doorknob by our faith so that He can enter in. Here, God does not open a door and tell Jonathan to pick up a fight with the Philistines. Look what Jonathan says. Maybe. But Jonathan moved forward, not knowing but trusting that God would be his side. This is maybe faith. Although we are not sure what the outcome would be, we've got to believe that it will be good in order to pursue the endeavor. You see, when we are in the center of God's will, mostly there might be the moment when we go through greater trials and problems. Why? Because the center of God's will might not be necessarily the safest place, and it might be the best place for us. Let us move to the second element of Jonathan's faith when God moved his maybe faith to the victory when he was in his uncertain moment. Jonathan was willing to risk his life. He knew that the Lord would deliver him. Look what Jonathan said in verse 8. Very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them. This is such a poor battle strategy. Think of a battle. No army would disclose themselves to enemies. This is not from human instinct. Simply, it is saying, here I am, take your best shot. Jonathan let God take his battle because he was willing to risk his life. In other words, he placed his life in God's hands. In his faith, Jonathan made himself vulnerable. Many times in our lives, victory requires vulnerability. Sometimes in our life, we have to make ourselves vulnerable to connect our faith to any meaningful level of life. Jonathan says, if they tell us to wait, we'll stay where we are. If they tell us to come over, we'll cross over them. This statement clearly reveals how Jonathan trusts God. He knew that God governs the hearts and minds of those who even do not know or serve him. Jonathan truly made himself vulnerable to experience the presence of the mighty God. Look at verse 11. So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. The Philistines look at Jonathan and his armor-bearer with disdain, ridicule, and contempt. The Philistines considered Jonathan and his armor-bearer as cowards because they were crawling out of their holes where they were hiding. But Jonathan did not care what they said. How could they be cowards when God was with them? As the Philistines ridiculed them, they were even more courageous than before. See the next picture where Jonathan and his armor-bearer climbed upon the cliff and attacked the Philistines. Only 2 of them defeated about 20 Philistines. Now his faith is no longer a maybe. Look at verse 12. What Jonathan said to his armor bearer. Climb up after me, the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel. It was the Lord who fought the battle for Israel. We need to be a people who are not afraid and know that it is the Lord who fights for us. Moses said when the Egyptian army had trapped them at the edge of Red Sea, "Don't be afraid, just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. He himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Can you imagine the church being like this? The church, knowing that they can do all things through Jesus Christ and standing firm on the Word of God, would truly be a formidable force. Let us move to the third element in the faith of Jonathan when God moved forward his maybe faith to victory in his maybe moment. Jonathan took initiative and acted more than saying, "Let's go." He took an action and moved forward, climbing the cliff and engaging the enemy. Actually, Jonathan did not have to go. A battle with the Philistines was his father's responsibility. He could have stayed away from battlefield, like his father, who was figuring out what to do. But he moved forward. Look at verse 13, says, Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer right behind him. Here is the point. It was not a maybe with God. God acted upon the action Jonathan took, moving forward his action in God's will. Move to verse 15. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties. And the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. What the Bible tells us is that the Philistines fell before him, and then the earth began to tremble. There was a great earthquake, and the Philistines ran. See who sent panic? God did. Jonathan knew that the battle belonged to God, neither to himself nor to Israel. He sought the will of God even in his maybe moment, and God gave Israel a victory through Jonathan, a man of faith. So what is our conclusion? Seeking God should always be our priority, especially when we are in our maybe moment. Jonathan's faith in his maybe moment defeated the enemy when he knew whom he trusted, when he was willing to risk his life, and when he took the initiative. Remember that everything we do is under divine partnership. If God thinks we can do in our faith, He will give us the power and strength to do it. Maybe we are not certain at first, but when we move forward, God will move. Are you in a maybe moment? Listen what Jonathan says. Come, let us go. Climb up after me. By faith, we can move forward and act on maybe. And then there are miracles taking place. Often our faith is revealed in our maybe moment. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. If we have confidence, we may not need a hope. I pray that may the Lord bless you as you trust God and act on in your maybe moment.